Creating an entire universe of stars and planets is no mean feat. Braben and Bell achieved it during the 8-bit era, and Hello Games created the spiritual successor to that pioneer with its 2016 No Man's Sky release, and then continued to improve upon its majesty. However, as monumental a challenge as that was, getting the exact same universe into the Switch's memory and hardware budget is nothing short of galactic. Did anything get lost in space? The Switch continued Nintendo's trait of finding success within its own market. As such, it has enjoyed those riches with the most third-party releases of all of its consoles, with many of the ports presenting an uphill battle, but with No Man's Sky the obstacles are a little larger, and despite the reservations which even the team themselves had, we have been given the full Monty in mobile or docked mode, intergalactic travel, endless planet discovery and harvesting, space stations, battles, multiple modes, all thanks to the Waypoint version 4 update patch landing earlier this week, bringing the Switch version in line with all of the formats including PC. Well, aside two key areas which are both performance related. Multiplayer is possibly the biggest. In reality though, the game is mostly played solo anyway, and thus makes sense. The other are the large settlements for the same technical performance constraints. So from a content perspective, they have miraculously condensed everything into this tiny form factor, but avoided watering it down. As you would now expect though, this has come with some specific changes and reductions to ease the burden on all concerned, least of which is the console itself. The biggest of these are of course the visual reductions. World density is cut back over the PS4 version, which I am using as the baseline here. Grass, flora, fauna, object poly count, texture variety, resolution and details. Alpha effects such as grass, trees and the resolution and quantity of them all, along with particle effects, all have a lower level than the PlayStation 4. Not unexpected, and is dependent on the planet you happen to be on, but the procedural engine likely has a draw and poly count range to work within, which is reduced overall on the Switch. The level of detail is one of the most noticeable. The game has pop-in even on high-end PC, with the procedural creation engine powering it, which is identical here to all of the versions, causing some of that. But on the Switch, the near to middle distance can often be devoid of any clutter or detail, with many planets relying on the surface albedo layer for its identity. Pop-in is worse though, with billboard sprites used very close to the camera and a much shorter range of alpha tested grass. Lighting effects are reduced over PlayStation 4, as are many post effects, with the excellent per object motion blur completely removed, a cheaper sprite based bokeh depth of field used, material layers are cut back, as are decals across the board. Other reductions come in the form of CPU and RAM specifically will be at breaking point. At a very high level, the Nintendo console sports 50% less RAM and CPU cores than the PlayStation 4. CPU animation reductions cause half-rate updates unless you're within feet of the character. Sound quality is good, but there does appear to be less samples used, and variety of objects are simpler and even reduced on a smaller subset. Volumetrics and alpha are all half output resolution or lower, but it must be stressed that despite all of these areas and likely even more, the game loses none of its wonder and charm. Volumetric clouds still cover planet atmosphere as you enter, weather storms still flood in and fill the screen, animals roam freely and are still procedurally generated and animated, given the same randomized nature of each world no matter how many you find throughout your play, and a full dynamic time of day is present and correct on the Switch. But ultimately the biggest visual markers you're playing on the Switch, on a large screen at least, is the resolution. Docked is approximately 1120 by 630 with little to no AA applied, or if so, potentially FXAA, which means it can be noisy but sharper when stationary. DRS is again possible but not noted from my counts. The results are good but muddy. Depending on the scene's construction, it can be quite noisy. Leaving out anti-aliasing of the post suite is often a choice many Switch titles take, as it can gain back quite a few vital milliseconds for higher resolution effects, or both, but it comes at the expense of shimmer but a sharper image quality. On a smaller 1080p screen, it looks better, and dependent on the amount of subpixel elements such as grass or specular highlights, the on-screen results can be great to noisy. Now, the handheld mode cuts a lot of this back as expected. Resolution is the single biggest, which can affect many aspects within the render. Shadow quality is quite similar, imposters can be used closer to the camera than real geometry, and even then the level of detail is reduced across all depth tests, meaning objects' poly counts are lower and closer than when they are in the docked mode, as are texture maps, decals and details generally. Much of the image reduction and perceived lower levels of LOD though is due to the resolution. A further 36% to an approximate 896 by 504 output. Or in other money, docked is 56% higher than in handheld mode, which aligns close to the clock rate and thus GPU performance gains between docked and handheld modes. But on the move, the reductions are far less obvious, and in reality, the handheld mode is my preferred way to play this incredible adventure. I've often said about the Switch, it's a handheld console that can be played on a screen, and this title is a great example of that. No matter what you're doing, it still feels sufficiently epic and unique on the move to someone like myself who's played the title since launch day across console, PC and even VR, which is still my favourite version of the lot. On the Switch, you can enjoy all this immense universe and trading and exploring on the train, plane or even just in bed, and it's arguably one of the greatest experiences on the Switch. The Steam Deck version has much to thank for this though, as the team made the update on that version and then were asked what are the odds of a Switch port. Never ask a programmer what are the odds.
Never tell me the odds.
The team did expect to make cuts to the engine code, largely related to procedural generation process, memory and CPU requirements, but in the end it all worked, or at least they made it work. Many times updates to better hardware get the praise from us here and elsewhere, but an equal amount of work, and maybe even more, has gone into the sympathetic culling of assets, materials, sound, level of detail and more that balances the experience the team want within the limits of the host platform. Now, this review was a little later than planned, as we did reach out to Hello Games for more details on the port. Unfortunately, the team were and remain deep in the workload on this Switch port itself being shipped, alongside that Waypoint update to give us a full interview. However, they did advise and reinforce the point I mentioned earlier around how heavily the Switch is being taxed, specifically around the CPU and memory requirements, and that's all related to the amount of work they had to do to ensure that procedural engine worked as it does on every other version, which was quite a task. But they did add that this is only the start of the Switch version as we now see it, and they noted the original PS4 launch managed to take a caterpillar into a butterfly with its next update. So I can be confident there'll be patches to come and much more to cover and discuss as this Switch port continues to evolve. And this brings us to performance, and it's another key area here which could have been a problem, and in most sections played and tested it holds a good delivery of that 30 FPS target, both in docked mode and handheld mode where they both target 30 FPS. Some skips, again likely memory related from its double buffered engine, can cause 16, 33 milliseconds and 50 millisecond points, but often the frame time is at that perfect 33 milliseconds, but it is heavily memory bound. With such a dynamic title though, dips will and do occur. The mining tool is a great example across all versions, and here the Switch can get just above the teens. With an endless supply of planets, it cannot be ruled out that some of these could also dip when there's heavy GPU load, alpha tested, and just draw count from polygons and alpha. And you can see this on some of the planets when you're walking around, and the exact same thing can happen on the PlayStation 4, albeit with that version having significantly more power and visual load. Therefore, I would keep the expectations in check here that you could have some dips to the lower levels of the 20s on heavier planets. The PS4 version though is uncapped, or at least you could turn it off in the menu, meaning you can almost hit 60 FPS, likely a CPU limit as that game will be demanding on those Jaguar CPU cores, 7 and a bit of them in fact, and therefore it will be a marathon on the 4 ARM cores of the Nintendo handheld. Often though, the PlayStation 4 is comfortably at 30 FPS, which is where it can be capped, and as the Switch version is always capped. The performance can feel more consistent than the uncapped PS4 version, but I still salute the choice offered here, but the Switch is better for the fact that 30 FPS is the ceiling. Overall, the performance is very good in space battles, travelling around space centres, and moving in and out of planets. Yes, you are going to get some stutters into the 100 millisecond areas, you are going to get some frame pacing issues, and definitely some dips under 30. But generally, the game isn't heavy Twitch-based combat, so you just expect these, and it almost feels retro in that sense, because no titles back in the 8 and 16-bit days ran at a perfect frame rate, specifically ones that tried to push the boundaries such as this. Loading is actually one area that improves on the PS4, being approximately 22% faster at 1 minute and 10 seconds versus 1 minute and 29 on the PlayStation 4. Again, different assets, higher levels and different planets, but as close as I can get. But remember, on this title, once you've loaded back into your save, everything else is a seamless exploration from planet to planet, solar system to solar system is yours to enjoy. The scale of the game and engine remains incredible. Built upon a seeded telephone number from the developer, it can generate an entire universe. But it scales just as well across hardware. With this fourth update, it has now scaled right down to the lowest rung yet on the Switch. The scale of the planets is identical to the bigger machines. Yes, the planets lose some of their hustle and bustle that comes from the significant reductions in near proximity density. The visual bubble around you is easy to notice, the details are smudged, the creatures and formations are constructed of lower triangle counts, volumetric, alpha are all half the native buffer at best, debris and general world density is lower, texture filtering and quality of materials is lower, but quickly, all of this is forgotten, as the Switch delivers the essence at the heart of the team's aim, that of the wonder of travel, of space, of adventure, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new anyway, you can still see the point of this, to be your very own Captain Kirk, Uhura, or just John on his way to work on the train, hyperspace into the Gamma Quadrant at the edge of the galaxy, and I still love every single second of it. The team have made intelligent sacrifices here, but still deliver an impressive version that scales well on 8-year-old mobile technology. Now that seems space age to me. Anyway, if you like these deep dives into game technology, hardware, and all things related to video games and pixels, then keep it IGN Performance Reviews, and we'll catch you on the next one.